This is a story of a young girl of 12 years who became a victim of abuse and deception, shattered trust, and the devastating consequences of early pregnancy and abortion at a tender age of 12 years. For Jessica, the sanctuary of her church becomes a prison of secrets when she falls victim to a predator hiding in plain sight. Behind the facade of piety and respectability lurks a devastating betrayal that will change her life forever. As the truth unravels, prepare to be shocked by the depths of immorality and the wickedness of the human spirit. Will justice prevail, or will the darkness consume everything in its path? Watch until the end to find out. And if this is your first time on our channel, please subscribe for more powerful stories. Now, let's dive into the full story. Pastor Robert was the general overseer of the Wellspring Church, a very gigantic church with over 40,000 members globally. He was married to a very beautiful woman, the lady of his youthful days, Mrs. Elizabeth Robert, and they had 3 sons, James, Michael, and Francis. He had about 5 other pastors who assisted him in running the affairs of the national headquarters church in the state. Most of the congregation were very dedicated and devoted to his church, going out for outreaches and spreading the message. Out of these very dedicated members, there was a particular woman who was the most devoted to the church's activities. She was simply known as Madam Helen, and she was very nice to people. Madam Helen was so committed that she didn't miss any of the services for any reason, no matter how busy she was. She was loved by the church members, popular for her caring personality and kindness. She would move into the neighborhood with her daughter every Friday, preaching the gospel and sharing the church's pamphlet. After this, she would return home and get her daughter ready for school while she prepared to go to her store at a nearby market where she sold provisions. She was always prompt to church programs and made herself available every Saturday morning to clean the church premises, even though the church had dedicated cleaners who kept the church clean. Pastor Robert began to observe Madam Helen's dedication and loyalty, and he was really impressed. One Saturday morning, he stepped out of his office in the church compound and saw Madam Helen cleaning the church as usual. He walked up to her. She quickly bowed her head in greeting when she saw him. "Good morning, servant of God," she greeted respectfully. "Good morning, Madam Helen. How are you doing today?" he asked calmly. "I am fine, man of God, thank you, sir," she replied, bending down. "I have been seeing you around, and I must say that you are very committed to the things of the kingdom. May God bless you generously," Pastor Robert prayed, as she said amen repeatedly. "Can you tell me about yourself?" he asked her politely. Madam Helen told the pastor that she was divorced and that her husband had left for another woman 4 years earlier. She also explained how her husband had sent her and her only daughter, Jessica, out of their mansion after her husband had filed for a divorce. "They accused me of promiscuity and having an affair outside of our marriage with another man. He sent us packing after the case, and I managed to rent a room apartment close to the church here, and I started a petty business at the nearby market with the little savings I had as a wig seller," she concluded. Pastor Robert was moved by her story, and he decided to help her. "Thank God you didn't allow your challenges to affect your service to God," he said to her. He offered her a room and parlor self-contained in one of his houses, not far away from the church. He also promised to give her some money to add to her business. Madam Helen went on her knees and thanked the pastor. She couldn't believe her ears. She had always believed that the church was the safest place to be, but that day was her first time having an encounter. But before I will continue, please, if you're watching my story and haven't clicked on that subscribe button yet, please, you can be a part of my growth just by clicking on the subscribe button down below, and I really appreciate your support for my channel. The church had been her source of strength through life's challenges, a place where she felt secure. She saw the pastor's offer as a reward for her years of stewardship. True to his words, about a week later, Madam Helen was handed the keys to the apartment, and the pastor gave her reasonable amount of money to add to her business. He also ordained her as a deaconess in the church. Every member of the church was happy for her, as they felt like she truly deserved it. The house was in the same neighborhood as the house where the pastor lived with his family. Madam Helen and her daughter became very close to the pastor's family. They visited them often, and Madam Helen sometimes constrained her 14-year-old daughter to run errands for the pastor's wife. The two families became so close that Madam Helen would sometimes travel to buy provisions for her business, leaving her daughter with the pastor's family. She was beginning to buy in large quantities and made more profit because of the support from Pastor Robert. During those periods, Jessica stayed in the pastor's house and went to school from there. Her mother was so certain that her daughter was in safe hands, being not just a Christian home but one whose head was a pastor. If only she could see the end from the beginning, she never would have allowed her daughter to step foot into the pastor's house, much less live with them. While she was away, she didn't know that she had pushed her only child into the worst nightmare and destruction that no one would wish for their own child. Jessica was Madame Helen's only child. She had her after a painful fertility battle that lasted 10 years. Her ex-husband stood by her against all odds when his family tried to force him to marry another wife. He insisted that kids were gifts from God, and since both of them were certified okay medically, he was willing to wait until God decided to give them babies. Their breakthrough came after 7 years when his wife began to feel nauseous. She was confirmed pregnant, and their joy knew no bounds. She had a smooth pregnancy journey and gave birth to beautiful Jessica, who became the apple of her father's eyes. He loved her dearly and did everything possible to make life comfortable for both his wife and daughter. After the birth of Jessica, they tried to have more kids, but they were not forthcoming. Jessica's father had resigned to fate and focused on giving his daughter a good life. That was before he divorced her for another woman. An unfortunate incident, which happened when Jessica was 10 years old. Madame Helen was then thrown out of her husband's family, and she ended up in a one-room apartment close to the Wellspring Church, where she became a dedicated member. She made sure she instilled morals in her daughter, teaching her to be respectful and talk to people with respect. But there was one very important thing she failed to teach her. She thought Jessica was still too young to be taught. Madame Helen didn't teach Jessica anything about sex education and how she could stand up or defend herself if sexually harassed by anyone. The only thing she said to her was that she shouldn't allow any man or boy to touch her. That was unfortunately too vague for her to understand. 'Cause she saw her male classmates touch the females, and no one was hurt, she nonchalantly shrugged off her mother's warning. Jessica was already 13 years old by the time Pastor Robert decided to assist her mother after he saw her dedication and commitment in the church. Jessica, who was a religious girl like her mother, was full of youthful energy and was used to the rhythms of church life. Her mother continued to send her to the pastor's house to run errands for Pastor Angela. Although the pastor's wife didn't think it was necessary sending Jessica to run errands for her. She didn't tell her to stop, as she didn't want to make her feel bad or make her feel like her daughter was not welcomed in her home. On one such occasion, when Madame Helen traveled to a faraway state from their current city for business, she took longer than expected. It was a holiday period, and the children were all at home. In the morning, Pastor Robert would leave home to his office at the church premises, while his wife left for her banking work, which was located in the heart of the town. Jessica was usually left alone with the pastor's 3 sons, James, Michael, and Francis. The pastor and his wife didn't think anything could go wrong, as they felt they had taught the children enough to keep them in check. The 3 sons were all older than Jessica, with Michael being the eldest of the 3, and he was 23 years old. Michael gained admission into the university. Pastor Robert and his wife were very strict parents and hardly allowed them to go out as desired. Their movements were conditioned, from their home to church, from home to school and back home. As soon as he got to school, he felt like he had gotten all the freedom he needed. He began to mix up his friends with some horrible attitude who introduced several bad habits to him. They encouraged him to go ahead and have girlfriends and freely have sex as much as he wanted. They made it seem to be like a norm, which he had already begun back in school. He had a girlfriend with whom he slept with as he always wanted, although thoughts of doubts about his new way of life which he had indulged into, which was the opposite of his parents' instructions. When he saw Jessica, he decided to try things out with her as she looks naive. Michael was naturally a funny guy, which made it easy for him to have a way of making friends easily because of his friendly nature. One afternoon by 2 p.m., Jessica was in the visitor's room, which was where she always spent the night whenever her mother was away. She was reading a church magazine when Michael knocked on her door, went inside, and bolted the door. James and Francis were taking a nap since it was a very sunny day. He began to tell her stories about campus life, some tales about sex and how much fun there was at the university. He also told her some jokes which made her laugh so hard. Then he advanced toward her and began to touch her in an improper manner. Jessica resisted, but he had his way to calm her down, saying he was only playing with her. After a while, He slipped his hands into her pants, then deep down under her private parts. Jessica wanted to scream out loud for help, but he covered her mouth with his hand. He eventually had his way with her, and she began to bleed. She cried so hard and threatened to report him, but he warned her, "If you try it, I will kill you, I promise." He opened his pocket and showed her a small knife to back up his threat. Jessica became afraid and promised not to ever tell anyone. He went out and returned with a roll of paper napkin with which he asked her to use it to clean up herself. Then he walked back to his room, feeling pleased and satisfied. Jessica was so scared that she locked herself up in her room until the pastor's wife returned in the evening from work. Pastor Angela noticed her mood swing and asked her what was wrong with her. "I am fine, Ma, I have been sleeping all day," she lied. "Fine? Then come and join me here, and let's prepare dinner," she said to Jessica calmly. Jessica joined her in the kitchen, and they began to cook. While they were at it, Pastor Angela asked her again if she was sure she was okay as she claimed to be. Jessica wanted to tell her exactly what happened. At this point Michael walked into the kitchen and shot her a life-threatening glance. "I am fine, Mummy," she replied, and quickly looked away. They all had dinner later, after which they all fell asleep. But Jessica couldn't sleep that night. The event of the day kept flashing through her mind. When she closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but yet couldn't find it, she sat up and cried bitterly. The next day, however, she gradually began to get over the events of the previous day. Michael walked up to her after their parents had left. He begged her to forgive him for what he did, saying he did it because she was beautiful and that he loved her. "I forgive you, Michael," Jessica said shyly. Michael invited her out to the compound, and they played some games with James and Francis. This further helped Jessica to loosen up. 3 days after Michael had his way with Jessica, he sneaked into her room again. This time he spoke to her calmly, telling her that he wanted her to be his girlfriend. He was gentle and soft with her, and he slept with her again. This time around, Jessica enjoyed every single bit of it. After they were done, Michael asked, "Did you enjoy it?" And she agreed. "I enjoyed it, Michael, and I think I would like to try it again someday," she said, smiling. Michael was flattered. He promised to teach her different styles that would make her enjoy it even more. Jessica's mother spent over a week before she returned from her trip. She returned with some groceries as a gift for the pastor's family, and she thanked them for taking good care of her daughter while she was away. Looking at Jessica when she returned, Madame Helen's motherly instinctive reaction told her something was not right about her daughter's behavior. Jessica was easily carried away. She caught her daughter smiling to herself on several occasions. She asked her what was wrong. "Nothing is wrong, Mama. I am just happy to see you back again. I love you," Jessica told her mum. Days passed, and everything was good. Madame Helen continued with her business, and Jessica was always there to help out. Michael went back to school and showed off his new catch to his friends in school, and they all praised him, most encouraging him to have more fun with his catch. Jessica, who was in JS2, also went back to school after the holiday. That term in school, they were taught about the reproductive system. This was how Jessica got to understand that what she was doing with Michael could result in pregnancy. She had begun her period about 3 months earlier, and she recalled her mother's warning not to let any man touch her, as she could become pregnant. Madame Helen also noticed that Jessica, who used to feel resistant whenever she asked her to go to the pastor's house and help out, suddenly began to ask her to allow her to visit them even when she didn't ask her to. Madame Helen still didn't see anything off about her new behavior. She was even excited. Jessica and Michael continued to have sex whenever Michael was around. She had gone so deep in this evil act that she didn't wish to stop. Michael made her do so many things with him, and Jessica obeyed all. She was really enjoying it. When she returned home to her mother, she would look so innocent that her mother was used to knowing about her. Michael also acted to be the calm pastor's son whenever he was in the house, but immediately he got to school, he changed completely. This act by Michael and Jessica continued for months until Jessica turned 15. By this time, she had become addicted, so sucked into the act and was very much aware of the risks involved in it. Jessica suddenly missed her period one particular month, and she was really scared. She confided in one of her very close friends in school, who suggested that she do a urine pregnancy test. The girl went with her to the pharmacy and got a PT strip. She conducted the test, and it came out positive. Unsure of how to handle the situation, Jessica waited for Michael to return home. After about 2 weeks, she went to their home, called him out to an isolated area in the compound and broke the news to him. Michael was thrown off balance. "What are we going to do? I am too young to be a father, and you are not ready to be a mother yet," Michael said, visibly shaking. "I will come up with something. In the meantime, please don't tell anyone about this, do you understand?" he asked her. "Yes, I know I'm not supposed to tell anyone about it," Jessica responded. As they both turned to leave, they got the greatest shock of their life. Pastor Robert was standing right behind them, and he heard everything. Michael and Jessica were shocked to their bones. They didn't hear any footsteps behind them, so they wondered how Pastor Robert got to them without any sign of him coming. The pastor had left some files at home when he was leaving that morning. He came back home for the files but parked his car outside and walked into the compound. He heard whispers from the backyard and decided to see who was there. Pastor Robert stared at them for a while without saying a word. They both began to shiver. After a while, the pastor turned and began to walk away. "Follow me now," he commanded. They both ran after him immediately. He led them into the living room and sat down on the sofa, while both of them stood in front of him. The pastor began slowly, How long has this been going on?" He coordinated himself to ask. He was still amazed. "For about 2 years, sir," Michael answered with his head bending down low. "Michael, where did I go wrong? I brought you up in the way of truth, fed you daily with the word of God. What did I not do for you? Why choose to repay me like this?" the pastor asked. "I am sorry, Daddy," Michael said as he began to sob. Quietly turning towards Jessica, the pastor said, "And you, why didn't you reject him when he came to you? Some of you girls will be acting so innocent, but you are worse than the serpent himself. Have you told anyone about this?" he asked her. "No, sir, I haven't told anyone," Jessica quickly replied. "Go home to your mother and do not say a word to her about it." "I will handle it," Pastor Robert said as he dismissed Jessica. Still shaking, she ran out of the house and went home. That night, immediately after dinner, Pastor Robert told his wife about the incident of Jessica's pregnancy. She sat down on the floor and began to scream as tears ran down her cheeks. Did you do it? You have killed me," she said as she continued to wail. "Put yourself together, woman. This is not the time to shout but to act," he yelled at her, and she quickly calmed herself down. "I don't know what you mean by act. Michael is 23, and Jessica is 15. If he was bold enough to sleep with her for over 2 years until she got pregnant, then he should be ready to take responsibility," she said to her husband. "He will be done with school next year. Then he should get a job and take care of her and the baby." Mrs. Elizabeth drew her conclusion. "You have spoken like the way a woman would speak. Have you paused to consider how it will affect my personality and my name?" Pastor asked her when she stopped talking. "I am a pastor and a mentor to many people, singles, married, and young parents. They all see me as a role model. How do you expect them to look at me if this news gets out there?" he asked her. "It will tarnish the reputation, the image I spent for so many years building, and I can't let that happen just because of this boy," referring to Michael, he concluded. "Honey, I don't understand what you are driving at. Keeping the baby and letting Michael take up the responsibility of the baby is the right thing to do. Allow people to say whatever they want to say," his wife insisted. All the while his parents were having this conversation, Michael was at the door overhearing them. "God forbid I can't become a father at this age," speaking silently as he left the door and returned to his room. He decided to handle the situations on his own way without letting anybody know about it. He called one of his close friends in school and told him what was happening and how his mother was insisting he take responsibility for the unborn baby. "That one is a small case now, my friend. We have flushed a lot of pregnancies for girls," his friend told him on the phone. He mentioned some ingredients for Michael and instructed him to mix them together to serve Jessica to drink, that once taken she would pass out the baby like a normal menstruation. Michael appreciated him. In church on a Sunday morning, during the sermon, Pastor Robert began to talk about parents who were very ignorant of the upbringing of their children. He said that some were busy trying to make money and ignored their primary responsibility as parents, which is raising godly, holy children. He said a lot of things indirectly to Madame Helen, but she didn't understand that he was talking to her, although she was touched by the sermon and made up her mind to make amends. She didn't know that things had gone so bad. During service, Michael passed a note to Jessica, asking her to meet him at a certain location after service. At home that day, Pastor Robert told his wife that he would invite Madame Helen and reach an agreement with her to abort the baby while he paid them some money as compensation. His wife didn't like the idea, and she kicked against it. They were unable to reach an agreement on that day. Jessica met Michael at the agreed point of location, and he gave her the substance, which he had already mixed together, the one his friend had explained out for him. Jessica innocently took the substance after he told her that she would pass the baby out as menstruation. She knew what she had done to herself. After she drank the substance, Michael asked her not to tell her mother anything about it, that she would be fine. Jessica was just a naive girl, and Michael knew about this and he was taking advantage of it. He made her promise not to tell her mother, after which she left for home. When she got home, her mother called her and sat her down. She had been level-headed since she left the service that morning. She felt like the Sunday sermon was referring to her. She'd been so busy trying to make money to cater for herself and her daughter that she completely forgot to pay much attention to her daughter. Jessica, my daughter, first of all, I want to thank you for being a good girl and for not putting me into disgrace and making my enemies not laugh at me, she began. I know your father's family do not want anything good to come out of us, but God will put them to shame. I also want to beg for you to forgive me for not always being available in your life like I should. I was only trying to make ends meet and give us a happier life. Please pardon me, my love, said her mom, my daughter, and I promise that from now on I will make more time for a mother-daughter bond. I won't be traveling to buy goods as much anymore. I have made arrangements on how the goods will be sent to me while I simply just transfer money to them, she concluded while giving Jessica a gentle pat on her back. Then she asked Jessica if there was anything she wanted to talk to her about. Jessica thought for a while and said she had nothing to tell her. Feel free to talk to me, my baby. Ideally, I should be your best friend. Don't hide anything from Mummy, okay? She told her. Okay, Mummy, Jessica responded. Then her mother asked her to go into the kitchen and make some food for them, which she did. They had lunch that afternoon and also dinner later that night. After dinner, she told Jessica some nice African folktales by Tales of Eve. It was a happy moment for Jessica. The last time her mother told her stories was just before her father left them. She didn't realize how much she had missed it until that night. She begged her mother to always tell her such lovely stories, and her mother promised to do so. Then they went to bed. Jessica suddenly screamed from her sleep in the middle of the night at around 1 a.m. at night, squeezing her stomach and rolling on the floor in pain. Her mother jumped up and asked her, what was wrong with her? I feel very severe pain in my tummy, Mummy, she screamed even louder. Madame Helen became confused. Could it be the food they ate? She wondered, but they both ate the food, and she was doing fine. Did you eat anything outside the food we both ate in this house? She asked her daughter, looking confused. No, Mummy, Jessica managed to respond as she continued to roll on the ground in pain. Suddenly, she began to bleed. In a matter of minutes, the whole floor was filled with blood. At this point, the pain had become unbearable. Jessica began to spill the blood. She told her mother how Michael, the pastor's son, had his way with her and how they kept having sex until she became pregnant. He gave me something to drink this afternoon, saying that it will help to flush out the baby, she added. Jesus. Jessica, you have finished me. Madame Helen screamed as she began to scream for help. She ran out of the house and called her neighbor, who had a car. The man was kind enough to take them to the hospital that night. The doctor on duty demanded a deposit before they could commence treatment. After they ran a scan on her, he said that Jessica's womb was ruptured and that urgent surgery was needed to save her life. Thankfully, Madame Helen had some money with which she was planning to restock back to her business. She quickly made the transfer, and Jessica was rolled into the theater. The surgery lasted for over 2 hours. That was the longest hours Madame Helen ever had in her entire life. She continued to cry uncontrollably, begging God to have mercy on her and not render her childless in her old age. Dear God, I know I have been very careless with my parental duties. Please, I plead for you to have mercy on my poor child. I take all the blame. I have failed as a parent. Please give me one more chance to make things right, she prayed as she continued to pace up and down the corridor of the hospital. Then the doctor finally came out. The look on his face nearly made Madame Helen collapse. "Doctor, how is my daughter?" Madame Helen asked, looking anxious. The doctor stared at her for a while, then he turned, facing his office. "Come with me to my office, Ma," he told her without looking at her. "Doctor, whatever it is, please tell me here and now. I will take it in good faith," Madame Helen blurted out, stopping the doctor. He turned to face her and wanted to say something, but Madame Helen interrupted him. "Was the surgery successful? Were there complications? Please tell me, doctor. Tell me everything went fine," Madame Helen said, looking so restless and confused. "I am a single mother, and that girl is my life. She is my only child. She is the one I am living for. If anything happens to her, I will kill myself," Madame Helen added as she broke down in tears, thinking that the worst had happened. "The surgery was successful," the doctor said, jolting her to her feet. She began to dance and sing praises to God while the doctor watched her in amusement. "God of the widow and God of the fatherless, thank you for coming through for me. I will serve you forever," she sang. She was about to move her dancing steps to another gear when the doctor gave her a gentle tap. "Madam, I asked you to come with me to the office because there is more," he said to her. She lost a lot of blood already, and she would need to be transfused as soon as possible. "Her PCV is very low," he added. He called a nurse and asked her to go with Madame Helen to the lab to get the result for Jessica's blood test so she could get blood, go to the blood bank. After getting the test result and get 2 pints of blood for a start. "After the transfusion, I will tell you other things you need to know," he added. Madame Helen thanked him and hurriedly left for the lab. She did exactly as she was told, and soon Jessica was moved to a private ward and they began to transfuse Jessica. Madame Helen was allowed to go in and see her daughter but was warned strictly not to make noise. She sat by Jessica's bed and began to sob softly when she saw how helpless her daughter looked. Again, she began to blame herself for being careless. She prayed to God to grant her daughter a speedy recovery. "I do not take this second chance for granted, Lord. I will be a better mother going forward," she muttered. More than anything, Madame Helen wished her daughter would at least wake up and talk to her, but Jessica slept throughout. By morning, she went home to clean up and to prepare some food. She also made pap, hoping that by the time she got to the hospital, Jessica would be awake and able to take a little. When she got back to the hospital, Jessica was awake, and the transfusion had been completed. Madame Helen hugged her daughter and apologized to her. She admitted she had a larger share of the blame. Jessica also apologized to her mother and promised to do better from then on. The doctor entered to check on Jessica. He told Madame Helen not to feed her baby girl yet, the drip would sustain her. "You can start giving her light pap from tomorrow," he told her. He asked her to see him in his office immediately. All the while, Madame Helen didn't call Pastor Robert and his wife or go to them. She was only interested in her daughter's recovery. She excused herself and went to see the doctor after some time. "We thank God for her life. She is responding to treatment, and her recovery is faster than we thought. However, there is a little challenge," the doctor began. "You remember I told you her womb was ruptured. Ordinarily, we would have asked for your consent to take it out if she had given birth or had kids," he went on. "But what we did was to patch it up. Oh, thank God it was able to arrest the bleeding, but I have bad news," the doctor said, giving Madame Helen a glance. "What news, doctor?" Madame Helen sat up immediately. "The chances of her being able to carry a child is 50-50, the doctor answered. "What do you mean by that, doctor?" "She may or may not be able to bear children. As a matter of fact, it would take God's miracle for her to be able to carry a baby beyond the first trimester," he let out. Madame Helen was shocked to her nerves. She sat glued to her seat, trying to properly digest what the doctor just told her. "If I get you correctly, doctor, you are trying to say that my daughter, Jessica, won't be able to have children of her own?" she asked, looking shocked. "It will take a miracle for that to happen," the doctor replied with a calm voice. "God. Michael has finished me. Pastor Robert and his family have succeeded in destroying my daughter's life, she began to wail. Jessica is my only child, my only hope, doctor. Please, there should be something you can do to help me, Madame Helen pleaded with the doctor in tears. I am sorry, Ma, but there is nothing we can do. She still has her uterus, she can still have children. There is nothing God cannot do, he answered her. I am only informing you of her medical condition. Madame Helen put herself together, thanked the doctor, and left his office. She went back into Jessica's ward. I want to quickly get to the house to attend to some things. I will be back soon, she told her daughter and walked out of the ward immediately. She went straight to the church and went to Pastor Robert's office. She walked past the secretary, who tried to stop her from entering the office. She entered the office without knocking. Luckily for Pastor Robert, he didn't have any guests at that time. He looked up as the door opened and saw his secretary trying to prevent Madame Helen from gaining entrance. Let her be, he said to his secretary, who quietly walked out. Madame Helen, you are welcome. I hope all is well. Please sit down, the pastor said, offering her a seat. I didn't come to sit down. Are you aware that your son, Michael, got Jessica pregnant? Madame Helen asked calmly, trying not to get upset. Pastor Robert kept mute for some time before he finally answered, I only just found out on Saturday, and I was still waiting for the right moment to speak with you, he replied. Oh, I see. Are you also aware that Michael gave Jessica something to drink to get rid of the pregnancy? She asked again. This time, Pastor Robert was surprised. Michael did what? When? How? He asked. As I speak to you right now, Jessica is in the hospital. She had to undergo surgery because she began to bleed as a result of the unknown substance given to her by Michael, which she consumed. Pastor, my daughter might not be able to have children, according to the doctor, she informed him. Get ready, because I will get Michael arrested, she said and turned to leave. Stop there, Madame Helen. How dare you threaten me after all I did for you? Pastor Robert thundered. You are the most careless mother I have ever come across. This is all your fault. You gave Jessica too much freedom, he went on. You cannot threaten me with arrest. We can talk things over without having to create a public scene of ourselves, he concluded, looking unapologetic. Madame Helen began to clap her hands. Wonderful speech, Pastor Robert. I expected this energy from you. So because you did all you did for me, your family can deprive my daughter of her chances of becoming a mother and expect me to be cool with it? If I am the most careless mother, then what are you and your wife? Both of you claim to be pastors, yet you raised a rapist as a son. I will let the whole world know the kind of wonderful parents both of you are. Don't worry, Madame Helen fired at him as she walked out of his office and slammed the door. Pastor Robert was very upset. He picked up his phone and called his wife immediately, and asked her to meet him at home at once. Then he left the office and drove straight home. When his wife got home, he told her about his confrontation with Jessica's mother. Mrs. Elizabeth was shocked to know that Michael could give Jessica something to take to get rid of her pregnancy. She wondered where he learned such an immoral act from. Michael has finally given us a bad name, Pastor Robert said as he went into Michael's room and called him out.